Oi, 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 everybody. Unclench your jaw, get some water. I think we need to have a sit down discussion about the knight. Look, I love playing this killer. I'm a pyramid head main, but I'm also now a knight main, and I love the potential that this killer has. Playing the knight can sometimes feel really rewarding and like a fun chess match as you send a guard out to check one gen and chase one person while you chase another person and injure them, and then you down that person and you interrupt people healing, and like it can feel really fun you moving your pawns across the map like that. However, a lot of people play him like this. This has to go. So let's talk about what we need to do to nerf and rework some of the knight's powers. Now, first off, let me put it out there. I've gone on numerous 17 to 22 win streaks in a row as the knight without using deeply unsavory tactics, without like tunneling, camping, and without using gen kick perks like Brine or Overcharge or Eruption. The knight is certainly a viable killer, so if you're telling me now that the only way to play the knight is to play him in these kind of deeply unfun ways, I think you just don't understand the ability, and that's okay, that's fine. But you can make him work, and you can make him work well. So now I do want to start at the beginning. I do quite like the concept of the knight. I like having multiple guards. Like I said, I love that chess match. I love pressuring the map. A lot of people for a long time complained about killers not having map pressure. This, XYZ killer comes out, well, they don't really have map pressure. That conversation's changed over the years, but at the end of the day, this is one of the only killers that doesn't teleport or use speed as map pressure, and I think it's really interesting. So I think we want to keep to that a little bit when talking about reworks. The other thing is we need to be realistic about what behavior could do. I actually want to suggest changes that they could implement if they take a little bit of time to do so. Full reworks don't really happen anymore, unfortunately. The team doesn't have time as they're working on 2 to 3 DLCs at any given point in time at the exact same time. So I'm talking about things that I think could actually exist. But first, let's go ahead and let's dive in. I do want to identify the 3 things that people find unfun. The 3 things are pushing you into corner and plopping down a guard. No trail drawing, nothing, just guaranteeing a hit by just plopping, insta-spawning a guard. The other thing would be the 3-gen strategy, which this is something that I don't think is really a problem too much, but we could talk about that. And then lastly, we have camping with the guards, which is less than a problem than we'd like to believe. So of these 3, let's address camping first. Lots of knights will put somebody on the hook and then put a guard down to camp that hook. A lot of people say that behavior shouldn't be, or behavior should make it so that guards can't spawn under a hook that is in use. I don't intrinsically maybe disagree with that, but at the same time, if you are being chased by a guard or if you proc a guard and then you start to unhook, the guard goes away. So that's really this problem boils down to a survivor knowledge gap. Survivors just not knowing that this is something that they can do to counter the knight. So if survivors knew that, maybe it wouldn't be such a big problem. It does suck to die to survivors who are too scared to unhook you, but I also feel like that happens a lot with a lot of other killers. So I'm not really sure. It's hard to figure out if that's a real issue. The other thing would be 3-gens. Now, with Eruption being nerfed, I think that 3-genning is less of a problem with the Knight. I mean, realistically, if we look at a lot of killers like the Nurse, Spirit, Blight, if we look at Hag or Pyramid Head, when it comes to 3-gens, 3-gens can be very painful on a lot of killers. So I don't know that we should necessarily change the Knight so that he goes through massive cooldowns or something like that, because at the end of the day, I think survivors can prevent 3-gens a ton, and again, with Eruption being changed, maybe this is something that could be worked around, but I'm definitely willing to wait and see on that because I'm not 100% sure. Now, I want to get to the core issue of plopping the guards down. This is something that a lot of knights go and do. This is how most knight players play. They will zone a survivor to a corner. Usually this corner has a junkie pallet or it's an LT wall or something like that, something that's of little consequence. And they will zone this survivor, they will drop a guard instantly and just plop them down. And that guard will either then push the survivor out of the loop, getting the knight in M1, it'll push the survivor towards the knight, giving the knight in M1, or in some cases, the guard hits the survivor, and then the survivor runs at the knight and gets a second hit, guaranteeing like a 2-hit situation. Now, The conventional wisdom to play against this strategy for the knight is to just leave the loop, which is neat if you're healthy, right? If you are a healthy survivor, then yeah, you know, even if you're detected by a guard, or if you're just leaving the loop as he summons the guard, that you can take the hit. That definitely makes sense. But if you're injured, that's it. You're down. The killer's guaranteed a hit with very little skill, with very little finesse. You know, Pyramid Head, Huntress, a lot of these killers, you do have to use skill, you do have to aim. They might be able to lock up a loop and zone you to some degree, but there is some counterplay. Is it always consistent counterplay? No. Even the Artist, one of the only other zoning killers we have, really, can place a crow, but you can still bait the crow. A survivor teammate can burn the crow with a flashlight. There's a lot that could be done that mitigates these crows so that it's not just a guaranteed hit with almost very little input from the killer, right? And that's kind of the core crux of the problem. It's unengaging, it's unfun, it minimizes both sides of the match down to a skillless slog where it's just like, okay, I guess I die now. And so I want to propose some changes. So the first change that I'd like to propose would be to force the knight to draw a path, right? Right now, the issue is that knights are just instantly dropping guards and then pinching a survivor and getting guaranteed hits. So let's make it so that they have to draw a path of a certain distance. I think personally making that between 10 to 12.5 meters. This would mean that the killer has to usually spend about 2 to 3 seconds drawing a path. The idea here is this is going to force the knight to draw, which allows some time for survivors to make distance away from the loop. And this also introduces some mind games for the survivor and for the knight, right? So for the survivor right now, they never really know if the knight's going to plop down at the loop or if they're going to try to send a guard to cut off the survivor as the survivor leaves or something like that. But if there's no ability to instantly drop one, then survivors might be able to double back through the knight, around the knight, or back into the corner where the pallet is, while the knight sends the guard to go cut off a survivor who never went that direction. It may allow for some counterplay and mind games that are at least a little bit more interesting than what exists right now. You know, the knight having to guess whether you're at the loop staying or whether you've run away or not. I think this gives perks like Iron Will a lot more value and Lucky Break a lot more value, things like that. So I think this is a little bit more interesting, and you know, if the knight miscalculates, misguesses, misjudges, then their guard is out there walking a path or a trail aimlessly, and the knight has to try to like M1 you around a pallet. So there's like something there. Now the next change I'd like to make is actually to make the detection radius of the guards be tethered to the distance of the trail, right? So if you draw a 10-meter trail, say that's the minimum, the arbitrary minimum. If you draw a 10-meter trail, then the detection radius of the guards is cut into a third of what it normally would be, or something of that nature. And the idea here would be that, you know, if the knight is going to do the bare minimum and just place a 10 to 12 meter trail, then they need to be really precise with where that trail is going to go. And this is going to encourage knights to maybe circle around an obstacle or send it way out ahead of a survivor or something of that nature. And this, again, would sort of induce this mind game from the survivor of like, okay, does the survivor cut a hard right to try to juke? Or if the guard spawns and it has only been drawn for 15 meters, maybe the survivor can juke a quick right and avoid detection. It means that the killer has to be a little bit more precise with where they're placing the guards to try to like push the survivor into a corner. And I think that that is a skillful thing that could be fun. So I think that could be really interesting, and it keeps distance and length play intact, right? If I down a survivor as the knight and I send a guard a full 30 meters, I think that the detection radius at a full 30 meters is completely fine, because I'm clearly busy where I'm at right now. And so I don't want to just nerf all of the guards' total detection radiuses. I think that that's too heavy-handed, and it doesn't provide a lot of counterplay. It nerfs him at all facets of his ability, both length and distance. So, you know, if it's short distance or long distance, we want to give a variable there that I think makes it more dynamic and interesting. So now, obviously, the next change that I'd like to make that I think is a no-brainer is allowing the guards to be pallets done. I know a lot of you are going to say, like, well, they're ghosts. How does that work? I don't know. How do you flashlight blind the Pyramid Head? Let's talk about it, you know? Or Demogorgon. It's just a mouth. So I think that, you know, we just have to put that aside for a little bit. But look, if a guard is used at a long range or a mandatory or a If a guard is used at long range or a mandatory draw distance is implemented, so 12 meters or something, then the survivor could be able, even if detected, to get to a pallet like this Steve can right here and make a choice. Do I hold W and try to just like wait this guard out, right? Because Carnifex has a longer chase time, the Jailer has a shorter chase time. So, you know, if it's the Carnifex, I can't, you know, be chased for 24 seconds or whatever. But if it's the Jailer and it's a lot less, maybe I can. So there's decisions to be made there. And if guards can be pallets done, then the survivor could even just say, you know, I'm going to camp this pallet and then stun the guard out and potentially block out the knight. And there's a lot of judgment calls about whether, you know, do I waste this resource or not? I think that's interesting. I think that's far more dynamic for survivors. And I think that that still provides some benefit to the knight if resources are being burned preemptively. You know, I think that that's still interesting. So now, it is currently worth noting that the way the guards are now, most people don't know this, if you throw a pallet while a guard is chasing you and you throw it a little bit early, the guard will actually run around it on the first attempt or the first sort of chase or the first, you know, encounter at that pallet. They will try to run around it, which is interesting. But if they are under the pallet when you throw it, you still get hit. So I think just this small change would make that like far more dynamic and interesting. Now, in addition to this, I would love to see the ability for survivors to use perks like Quick and Quiet or Deception to trick guards, right? So if a guard is chasing a survivor, the survivor rounds a corner and breaks line of sight from the guard, and they use Quick and Quiet to hop into a locker, the guard should stop, and they should like look around and be confused, and then they should despawn. And I think that that is interesting. Similarly, they should check lockers where Deception was used. Diversion should, you know, when thrown in the detection radius of a guard, should proc a guard and confuse them. I think having these perks that don't completely change the game, Quick and Quiet has a cooldown and things like that, I think this would be interesting, obviously, you know. And as the knight, if you see that a guard is like looking around and then vanishes randomly, you're like, oh, okay, somebody has Quick and Quiet, they're hopping in lockers, right? So you can glean information off this and use this for your future chases and use this to inform how you play. And I think it just gives more to survivors. And honestly, like, if zombies are already pulled by Deception or pulled by Diversion, I think that this is something we can do. Because most people don't run these perks anyway, and if they do, and they are in a match with a knight, it's just a bonus. It's just like, oh, cool, okay, I'm going to get use out of this. Now, other proposed changes that people have told me they would like that I think are interesting would be to allow survivors to, other survivors to grab the standard or the flag to despawn guards that are hunting their teammates, which could be interesting, right? If I'm chasing somebody and a guard is also chasing them and we're trying to kind of organize this sort of pinch attack at a distance, and then a survivor teammate runs up and grabs the standard, that's interesting. The survivors are grouped up. I get, you know, the cooldown on the knight is pretty short, so I can use another guard to follow up on the teammate now that has interfered and can continue chasing this person that I'm around. I think there's something like really, really interesting in this. And this, like I said, it would force people kind of off gens to run in groups of 2 to have each other's back. And that's obviously going to slow gen times down a little bit in some ways. And I think that that is interesting and, like I said, dynamic. You know, the idea with the knight is like it's a 4v4, but, you know, why not have this sort of force this 2v2 scenario to happen regularly? The standard still takes 5 seconds to spawn. For Carnifex, it's 10 seconds. I think there's something interesting here. Another thing that I heard would be the ability to blind a guard as it chases you, or to even light burn the guard. So blinding the guard would be interesting. This would require team play, so you round a corner and your teammates are there to blind him, which would still take about a second and a half. Or it would require that the survivor being chased is okay with potentially taking a hit if their aim is interrupted, right? Because if you're being chased and you stop and you're trying to flashlight and then back up as that thing is running at you, you might take the hit if your aim misses just for a second. This could be interesting, and this would burn survivor flashlights so that they run out of battery pretty quickly. This would be limited time use unless everybody had tons of flashlights with double batteries. So it's interesting, and it would be limited time. The beginning of the match, they would be more likely to use some of their flashlights than at the end when they're out of battery. Simultaneously with Lightburn, they could do something like what they have with Wraith, where you have to hold it on them for about 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and then it would burn the guard out. This would be something that teammates would have to do, sort of similar to Carmina's Crows, and I think this could be interesting. And again, this forces it to be a fair 2v2. Two survivors have to kind of stick together and help each other, and I think that that is, again, more dynamic and more interesting. And flashlight batteries are finite, and so if you have to sit there and try to aim at this moving target and burn it out for your teammate, I think that at the end of the day, that's really interesting and finite. So all in all, I think if survivors can use flashlights, they can use lockers, and they can use pallets to mitigate these guards, night players will have to think a little bit harder about when and where to place guards and the most effective ways to use them. But the changes wouldn't leave the night players high and dry. Survivors would be using their resources like their flashlights, they would be using flashbangs, or they would have to use their pallets, and ultimately be grouped up and waste a little bit of time that they could be spending on generators. I think that makes matches more dynamic. I think it encourages team play and group play, and I think it's far more interesting. But what do you guys think? Definitely let me know how you're feeling down in the comments below. I think this would mitigate a lot of the annoying just insta dropping of guards, and I think it would make the current situation with long range guards a little bit more interesting too. Until next time though, I'll be praying to the entity to see you guys in the next video.